us today a very distinguished set of people you're going to hear in this opening plenary. But the subject of the plenary was, what will India do? And the tagline that came up was, America innovates, China replicates, Europe regulates. And I was trying to think, if I had to define India in some way, I thought India collaborates. And I don't think there could have been a better opportunity and a better way to define this August gathering here, which has come from 30-odd countries to collaborate on a theme, which is a forum for good, and create new models for the world. I think it's that spirit of India, Indianness that resides in the diaspora everywhere, that is so reflective of what we are having and discussing here today. So again, a very warm welcome to all of you. And as MR mentioned yesterday, the entire discussion around Indiaspora that started 12 years ago, I still remember that time in his home, thinking of the relevance of the diaspora, for the United States initially, then the journey from the diaspora engaging with India, today having a global diaspora that has, come together to discuss issues that will matter, at least in this plenary, for India, is a huge journey. And congrats, MR, and I want to acknowledge our board, Arun and Priya, who are here, and Sanjeev and the whole Indiaspora team for some great work that you've done to put this all together. When you think of collaboration and we are talking of what India will do, it's coming at a time that is very tricky, right? We're seeing there's so much happening in the world, there's so much uncertainty. There is a change in the roles that countries are playing, from the West when it comes to seeing how you can create a new global world order. And I think that's where India's opportunity really comes up. And while there is a whole debate, of the two superpowers, India and China, I always like to say India will be a super partner to the world. And I think it goes with the theme of collaboration. And the way one can partner with the world to see a better world is probably what will get India to achieve its true position in the global world order. And, our Honorable Prime Minister likes to call this the, golden age of India, the Amrit Kal. And I was just trying to put something around the acronyms Amrit, since many people have done that since yesterday. I think if we look at A being, how do we achieve, our true position in the global world order? For that, really, we have to maximize, I think, our inclusive economic progress around manufacturing, services, agriculture. We have to revitalize, I think, our, soft power, whether it's in sports, whether it's in arts and culture, whether it's in tourism. We need to be able to innovate to really stay ahead of the curve, whether it's in climate change. And today, sustainable technologies, again, at the world which is suddenly starting to ignore that, we got to see how we can bring the focus back there. Digital platforms, transformative technologies. There's no discussion without AI and so many other things. And how does India really shape that world? And finally, I think, how do we transform the true bottom of the pyramid, the true power that needs to get India to its position to unlock its true potential by what we can do in education, healthcare, infrastructure, urbanization, governance, and many of these areas. So if one were to, in that context, look at what will India do, I think today's session, or this opening plenary, is really going to throw up a number of great ideas and a lot for many of us to work upon. So anyway, without any further ado, let me invite, on stage to really create and discuss the new pathways for India, someone who actually needs no introduction. Not only has she been a rise in media, been as meteoric as India's rise, probably larger than that. Having known Shireen from the early days when we spoke as young Turks to discussing over the years journeys around Indiaspora and India at 75, now Viksit Bharat, India at 100. She is one person who has actually, been through this whole journey of India. And who better than her to really navigate a conversation that will align all of us towards really taking action towards a greater future for India. So over to you, Shireen Bhan, and your panel to be able to discuss new pathways for India. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's always hard to do the opening plenary session, that too early in the morning, but I'm hoping that there's plenty of coffee that's done the rounds already and that the conversation is likely to be stimulating and provocative as well. So without further ado, we do have a strict time limit here, so I'm going to keep the conversations going. I'd like to invite on our panel this morning, Ashish Dhawan. Ashish, can we have you join us on stage? Anand Deshpande and Sudhir Sethi of Chirate Ventures. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our speakers here this morning. Well, we are here to talk about the new pathways for India's growth and for India's success. And I just want to address something that Rajan spoke about, and that is, of course, the overarching theme here as far as the Indiaspora conversations are concerned. America innovates, China replicates, and courtesy Rajan, India collaborates. But I think it would be wise to not think of China just as someone or a country that replicates, because I think if anything in the last few months have shown us that China is out there on the innovation curve and driving the innovation curve in many, many ways. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. And it's also important for us to see how that is going to impact where we find ourselves. But let's talk a little bit about India. We continue to see growth rates of about 6.5%, relatively stable in comparison to what's happening in the world today. And some of the mega trends that everyone's talking about that could shape India's economic future: urbanization, decarbonization, the demographic advantage, and of course the digital public infrastructure. All of these are ingredients that will shape India's economic growth story. But since we are going to be talking about the new pathways for growth and for India, Ashish, let me start by talking to you about what you truly believe we need to prioritize. What is that one thing that you believe will give us impetus as we find a new pathway?
Thanks, Shireen. So I agree with you that India has a huge task ahead of itself, that we need to grow at 8-10%, not at 6.5%. If I had to point to one thing, I would say it's ease of doing business. You know, India did macro reforms in 1991, and we did it reasonably well. And as a consequence, we've grown at 6.5%, as you said. But what we didn't do is micro reforms. We still have the same labor codes. We still have the same Factory and Building Act. We still have the same, fire inspector who comes and shows up, and the boiler inspector. So this Inspector Raj still exists at the micro level in India. And for large businesses, they know how to deal with this. But for small and mid-sized businesses, it grinds them down. And I think if we can, the Prime Minister just spoke about this, this idea of deregulating. The Chief Economic Advisor has been writing on this. So if you ask me, I think the single most important thing is to respect the entrepreneur, to give economic freedom to the entrepreneur, so that the entrepreneur can flourish. And I think that is the single biggest thing we can do. We have the entrepreneurs, but the state sort of grinds them down. And if we can liberate the entrepreneur through ease of doing business, we will grow at a much faster pace.
Liberate the entrepreneur. That's the one big idea that's coming to start the conversation here from Ashish Dhawan. But Ashish, if I can link that to India's aspiration for becoming a manufacturing hub, and you said that regulation gets in the way of really unleashing the animal spirit, so to speak. We've been talking about Make in India now for more than a decade, and a decade under this particular government as well, where there has been a concerted attempt at ensuring that we drive up or rev up the manufacturing engine. The fact of the matter is it's still about 13-14% of GVA. We haven't gotten even close to that 25% aspiration that we have. Is it the regulation problem that you just spoke of that's getting in the way of India becoming a manufacturing magnet?
No, I think it's more than that. So I would say for manufacturing, we are much better positioned today than we were 10 years ago. I think the enabling conditions are better. The infrastructure, so logistics, much better today. Roads, ports, the dedicated freight corridor, all of that stuff. We have much better industrial parks today. The states have a much better setup. Government of India is finally offering industrial incentives, PLI. Some of them have worked, some haven't worked as well. They're being redone. So I think there's a different, we didn't have this sort of package come together. I still feel that sectorally we need to address these. So take an example. We're starting to see green shoots in electronics.
Right.
India, China's electronics exports is 950 billion a year. India was almost non-existent as far as exports. Now it's crossed 30 billion.
Yeah.
Apple made a decision to manufacture the iPhone in India. And if you talk to the Apple folks, they'll tell you that productivity levels in India within 6 to 12 months were as high as those they're seeing at the plants in China. Their largest factory in India today is 42,000 people. The new one coming up will be 100,000 people.
Yes.
There are 41 factories today that serve the Apple ecosystem. And in electronics, domestic manufacturing is already $100 billion. And the Prime Minister has just announced a $500 billion vision for electronics.
Yeah.
I think India has the ingredients now to succeed. And we're doing 4 or 5 things. Earlier we did the one thing incrementally, but we've now got a PLI for components for value addition. We have a worker housing scheme that just got announced. We're reducing import duties, which are critical if you want to be competitive in exports.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things that are coming together. So I think that what we'll see in the next 10 years is very different from what we saw in the last 10 years.
Yes, and I think, as you said, that a lot of work has been done to put the production-linked incentive schemes in places. Of course, electronics is just one of those sectors that you spoke of, and Apple is one of the success stories. On import duties, I think if President Trump would have his way, we would be cutting import duties across the board, but there is a review underway at this point in time, and perhaps a decision on cutting import duties further. We're likely to see that happen over the next few weeks. But Anand, let me come to you now. We were talking about manufacturing, we're talking about unshackling the Indian entrepreneur. I want you to add to the mix your big idea on what India needs to do to find a new pathway to growth.
Hello. So I think I have a mic here.
Yes,
so
go
hopefully.
ahead.
So in addition to entrepreneurship and manufacturing that Ashish mentioned, I think the real opportunity is to get individuals at the ground, the nano entrepreneurs or the small self-employed people charged up, because I think that's where the gap would be. With automation and technology that we are coming in, while we will have large plants and manufacturing at scale, more and more of those are likely to be automated or use robotics or next generation technology. So real jobs, in my opinion, will happen at the ground with really small, tiny entrepreneurs. And today, that group is not very well supported as such. So we work very closely with those that make annually between rupees 5 lakh per year to about 1 crore. And that sort of fits into the no man's land in some sense. The SMBs are thought of up to 250 crores. And these really, the individuals and the gig workers, which is where a lot of the action will be, where if individuals feel empowered that they are able to find work for themselves, I think you will see long-term benefits for everyone across the board. So helping those young, small entrepreneurs, unshackling them through, avoiding regulation or making it easy for them to sell their goods is where I think the doubling of the effect that Ashish mentioned can happen.
Yes, I think in India we've been focusing on the unicorns, and it's time now to focus on the nano entrepreneurs that you speak of as well. Anand, but if I can link this to what is happening around us today, we're living in an age of AI, in an age of quantum computing, where every day the headlines are chasing us in terms of the kind of disruptive and transformative power these technologies are likely to unleash. From the services point of view, and I ask you this in the context of having built out persistent systems, what is this going to mean for India's services sector? That's been the big growth driver. That's been the big growth engine so far. Is it an existential moment for the sector unless it reinvents itself?
No, I think India's software is very well set up to reinvent itself. So the way you see the evolution, it starts from science, technology to engineering. And when it comes to engineering, that's where the Indian companies excel. So I think when you start looking at the business models that Indian companies have done of being trusted collaborators or trusted partners for large enterprises, the AI deployment within the enterprise is very hard it's not something that, so what we say is that it's not like snorkeling, that you would come pick up AI and jump into mission critical applications. It's more like skydiving. So you need to have someone along with you to take care of it. Yes, so that's what engineering is all about, and that's what Indian IT will do really well. And I think Indian IT will be better off because of AI, because I think it's going to improve productivity of individuals. I think the challenge that we will have is to convince ourselves that we have better ways of charging our customers and not getting connected to individuals that we have, which has been the model we have used for
the last, I would say, 25 years.
I'll come to the transition that we make from people to platform and what that
Yes.
potentially holds up as an opportunity as well as a challenge in just a second. But Sudhir, let me come to you now, because to take forward what we heard there from Anand, he's betting on the entrepreneurial spirit, as is Ashish, and you're putting your money on that. And Tirati Ventures is what, about $1.3 billion of assets under management today. And this is a story that has been growing over the last 20 years in India, and a story that's accelerated specifically in the last 15 years. In fact, 2024 was a breakout year for IPOs in India, perhaps the best year for Indian IPOs globally if you look at what's happened. But Sudhir, let's talk about what you believe will be the pathway to success and growth for India from your lens of investing in India's startups.
Thank you, Shrin. I'll speak from a capital point of view because that's what I do. I think India used to be running on a few cylinders, and now it's running on perhaps 100 cylinders. That's good. We've learned to run in parallel lanes fast right now. I think there are two things which are very, very important. One, there is a capital shortage in India. I think from an entrepreneurial point of view, it's very important to understand that. And the counter side of that coin is there is a lot of Indian rupee capital. The family wealth itself is valued at not valued, it's actually about $1.2 trillion. And in the next, I would say 4-5 years, it's likely to touch $3 trillion. Now, a bulk of this goes into public markets. Now, I think the big challenge is how can entrepreneurs tap the Indian rupee capital, which we've been talking to. There are a lot of people who are wealthy, very good people who recognize entrepreneurship. So how do you tap that into innovation? Because entrepreneurs are innovating in the market space with new business model, new technology, new revenue model, and new products, and new go-to-market. These are the 5 pillars of an entrepreneur scaling. So one thought which we've been sort of discussing is, instead of sectoral capital PLIs, why don't we look at an omnibus capital PLI? And the capital PLI doesn't decide where you have to go to. Capital PLI says, guys, you are now innovating. You're setting up manufacturing. You're setting up new product design. And that capital PLI reflects the direction in which entrepreneurs will take it, and similar benefits come at capital PLI level. And that to rupee capital will enormously fund R&D. Today, if I look at R&D investments in India, it's very poor. It's increasing, but needs to increase. If you look at consumer companies, a Lenskart or a FirstCry have addressed 25 to 30 million consumers to build $500 million to $1 billion revenue. But to address the next 100 million consumers and give them products, it cannot be a price reduction. It has to be a redesign, automated manufacturing at massive scale. And India has that massive scale, but needs redesign, needs R&D, etc. For instance, a Lenskart is already investing in material science. FirstCry has taken out a soap. You may think it's simple, but to take out a soap at 75 rupees and distribute across 3,000 cities is not a joke. You need technology to do that. So I think capital PLI is something which we should seriously think about, and entrepreneurs and investors from India, which will enable lots of rupee capital to go into VC and private equity and direct into entrepreneurs, and somewhat move a lot more into this sector from public markets.
And that's an idea worth discussing. But Ashish, let's address this issue, and I want all three of you to come in on this. I think, as was very rightly pointed out by Sudhir, we're talking about an era of AI and an era of innovation. But when we look at the R&D spends, whether it's government and private sector combined, India is about 0.7% of GDP versus 2.4% that China does on R&D spends, and of course, it is linked to per capita. But Ashish, how do we solve this problem? How do we solve the R&D and the need to innovate more in India problem? Is it a capital issue? Is it, again, a regulation issue? I mean, what do you think we need to do to solve this problem?
We need you, Shireen. So I'll say if you look at the R&D spend, government spends almost 65% of it, so about $25 billion a year. And industry only spends just over $10 billion a year, all of Indian industry. So it's a very, very tiny amount. So I think the biggest thing is to get industry to be more committed to R&D. And for that, I think Chris and I were speaking about it, but we need more. There are plenty of exemplars in India who have done good work around R&D. Anand is one of them. There are many others. And I think we need a coalition of champions. We need those exemplars those case studies to be known. I think companies need to have more confidence and more conversations at the board level. More of this sort of R&D culture needs to seep in. And they need to realize that it's existential, that they're not going to succeed in the next 10 years. As India opens up to global markets, as we want to succeed in global markets, you can't do it unless you step up your R&D investment. So that's the message that needs to go out.
So you're saying it's a
And
mindset
Shireen, you
issue.
need to be a part of that.
I'm attempting to be a part of it by driving these conversations, but you're essentially saying it's not a balance sheet problem, it's a mindset problem.
Yes.
Anand, would you
Corporate
agree?
India
Yeah.
has enough resources. It's under-leveraged. It has cash on the balance sheet. I think it's purely a mindset.
But, you know,
I will extend that into collaboration of, see, what happens is R&D again is not in an isolation thing. So an industry can't say, oh, I'll go do R&D. It's a combination of things. So if you look at India right now, we have the government investing in research labs, which are all doing research, but they don't have students with them. They don't collaborate with the industry. The students in IITs, they have some funds coming in, but they don't have any connects with each other. So if we can get the students, which are at large numbers, including PhD students, at the educational institutions, collaborate with government institutions and research lab where a lot of money is going in, along with the industry, I think the combination of the three will get you much better results. Right now, all of us are attempting things in our own isolated worlds, and
so the need for
it's not
collaboration.
absolutely, it's all about collaboration, and this is where you play a role, and such events also play a role here.
It does boil down to collaboration. But, you know, since we're talking about AI, and I want to get each one of you to comment on that. We've just seen, you know, the AI summit in Paris with, and of course, India will play host to the summit as well. But this idea that this transformation that we're on the cusp of, what does it mean for India? Anand, let me start by asking you, what does it mean for jobs, for instance? What does it mean specifically as far as entry-level jobs are concerned? This move from people to platform, what will it mean as far as India's demographic dividend is concerned?
So I think the two extreme scenarios are both extreme and more unlikely to happen. On one side, there is a good opportunity that because of AI and the fact that everyone will have an intelligent platform at their disposal, everyone could be super productive and we will have phenomenal productivity gains because of AI. On the other hand, if people don't adopt fast enough or we don't give them access, then we run the risk of people without AI, and that could be bad as well. So I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I think different companies will have to take different strategies. So the corporate India will have to figure out a way to adopt AI for their own good. Individuals will have to learn using AI so that they are far more productivity, and we need productive. And with some investments, I think we should build India-oriented applications. And I think the engineering of AI is starting.
Oriented applications, or get into the large language model race as well?
I think large language model, so again, this has gotten very confusing by because people saying wrong, not necessarily the right things. I think there is one set of foundational models which need lots of data and lots of AI.
And lots of capital.
And lots of capital. But then there are variations of large language models which are not that expensive, which can be built specifically. And now the small language models are equally good and can do amazing things. So I think we need not shy away from building language models. We need to build them. And we will build large ones, and then maybe they will become fundamental someday.
Yes, and that is the hope that the government is also working with, though I think there is confusion on
I think people are using LLMs to mean everything,
Yeah.
and there is a whole variety of
Yeah.
LLMs, from the small ones to the very large ones.
Absolutely.
And we need not say that we will do no LLMs. On the other hand, we can't say we will only do LLMs.
Absolutely.
So it's a combination of things. I think the next future is in the agentic AI, where you're going to see AI agents. And if you look at AI agents, they will combine LLMs to do more interesting things.
You know,
And that's the engineering that we should look ahead to.
That's the engineering that we should look at. We're talking about an agentic AI future. Ashish, what does it mean for India's young people? You look at the education sector closely, you work in the education sector closely. There's this clamor and clarion call for upskilling and reskilling, for reimagining education as we know it to cope with the future that we're talking about. Is it a problem that is being acknowledged and recognized today? And as we talk about new pathways, how critical is this going to be?
Yeah, so I think that, I don't think AI will have as much of an impact in India in terms of disrupting jobs, first. Because
No?
most jobs are fairly basic jobs, and I don't see them being disrupted by AI. I mean, we have humans available at low wage, and we already have technology. I mean, why do you have a guard at home when you could have CCTV? Actually, and India has 8 million
We
private
have both.
guards.
We have the CCTV and we have
And
the
I got
guard.
So I don't think it's going to be actually. It's a question of how we use these technology and how we equip ourselves to, whether it's in corporate world or more at an individual level. I think most jobs are fairly basic, even in manufacturing. Some disruption will happen in manufacturing over time, as Anand was saying. There's automation is taking, but people have been talking about the automation of ready-made garments, for instance, for a decade. But honestly, for every $1 billion of export, it's still 120,000 jobs in that sector. Automation hasn't happened. In electronics assembly, Apple still has 2 million people disassembling the iPhone in China. So while the escalator is moving up, we should be riding it and not fretting about this automation. Maybe it'll happen someday, but India needs to take advantage of these opportunities here and now in manufacturing, in other basic services as well, and keep, incorporating technology as we go along so that we are at the frontier.
Speaking of being at the frontier, Sudhir, and I think to Ashish's point, I think one of the big success stories that we've really seen break out in the last 2 or 3 years in India is the quick commerce story. And it's a very uniquely Indian success story because it's been able to marry the power of people with technology. Now, as you look ahead, this India playbook, where do you see it playing out, given the fact that we already have the digital public infrastructure in place, we have success stories like quick commerce, where else do you see this India playbook playing out?
So I think the India playbook is massive scale right now, which happened with UPI. UPI is 500 million people, but frequently usage of UPI on a daily basis is maybe 150 to 200 million people. But that enables an entrepreneur to think of a TAM which is large enough, which I think 5 years ago we never thought of as investors or entrepreneurs. But most important is, as I mentioned earlier, to address that TAM, you cannot have the same product. To address that TAM, you need R&D. You need a fantastic eyeglass at 500 rupees making significant margins. I use that example because I'm familiar with it.
Yes, and also made a lot of money off it.
So effectively, if you look at just what our portfolio has done, we have 7 manufacturing units under our portfolio. We have design in many companies. We have R&D being constructed. And most important, we have another 80 to 100 subcontracting units. So if you cannot build large companies, to my mind, over a period of time with innovation on product design, right? Which needs to be done to address the next 100 million people who, by the way, already have a digital payment system. That is absolutely crucial. That can be done by design. That can be done by flexible manufacturing, massive scale, like a few companies have done already in India.
The aspiration of transforming or transitioning ourselves to a product nation, what will that mean and how relevant is this going to be as we attack the next 10, 20 years from an India standpoint?
Yeah.
This arc of moving from services or marrying services with products, how significant is that going to be?
It is very significant because if you look at us under normal products, I'm not even taking into technology products because that's a different ballgame altogether. Normal products, which we used to import and still do many times, I think with innovation coming in, those products can be made, designed, manufactured in India. And that's slowly happening overall. It can increase the speed. I mean, the startup ecosystem revenue today is about $45 billion. It is not a startup ecosystem. It is a massive industry right now.
Yeah.
Now, innovation is the fulcrum of this industry. But if you look at the first phase of companies, they were all service companies.
Yeah.
right? Now, the second phase of companies, in whether it is SaaS or fintech or the platforms which are running, which enable quick commerce as an example, I think those are products which are being designed for a mass volume India.
Yeah.
Now that needs innovation, that needs investment in R&D, and that is what is slowly happening right now. New companies coming up in robotics, new companies coming up in every single sector. Health, I mean, I think the question is, how do you deliver health to 1 billion people?
Yeah.
Now that cannot be through another, 500 million clinics. It's very difficult to do that. So
Yeah.
what can be done digitally can be done digitally.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of R&D, design, manufacturing, supply chain logistic efficiencies. If in a port it takes, in one of the ports I read it was taking 7 to 8 days to clear,
Yeah.
whereas in China it takes 48 hours. We have to address that. That's speed. So
Yeah.
it's agility, innovation, speed, and capital formation behind that.
Absolutely. It's not the strongest, but the most adaptable that will survive in the era that we live in. I'm getting a signal to wrap up. I want to end with asking each one of you about what's happening with geopolitics. So we'll close the loop on where Rajan started, which is collaboration. We're living in an era where foreign policy is now being dictated by what President Trump tweets, or perhaps what Elon Musk also puts out on X. We've got the former Foreign Secretary here, Mr. Shringla, here with us. At the G20 in New Delhi last year, we talked about the idea of the IMEC, which is connecting Middle East, India, and Europe. We're talking about India entering many more bilateral economic partnerships, whether it's Australia or it's the UAE and others. Ashish, how important will geopolitics be from the point of view of forging a new pathway for growth and success?
I think it's extremely critical, but it will play to our advantage. I'm afraid to speak in front of our former Foreign Secretary, but I think Trump is essentially, it's the Project 2025 playbook. If you read it, what he's doing now is essentially that playbook. In that playbook, China is the mortal enemy. India isn't. I think there's political theater in terms of Mexico, Canada, India to negotiate, but China is the mortal enemy. And if that's the case, I think this China plus one or the value chain moving to India will be for real. India will be a more trusted partner. India has proven itself to be a trusted partner on the global stage. And in this uncertain moment, I think we'll be able to capitalize on that and hopefully benefit from it.
Well, that certainly is the hope at this point in time. Anand?
Yes, so I'd just add that I think at the end of it, we have people-to-people relations that are extremely good amongst Indians all across the world and Indians in other countries, especially the US. So despite Mr. Trump saying what he will, I think on the ground there is a healthy collaboration that's going to happen. So I think we just have to duck it a little bit. Let's see what happens.
We have to let the noise settle. Sudhir, I'll give you the final say.
I would perhaps go a step further and say there is uncertainty which gives an opportunity to, I will stick to entrepreneurs, to become extremely agile. If one country can't import, so if I look at our own portfolio, out of 3 billion revenue, 1/3 is international revenue today. Indian companies have, if they design a great product for India, that is valid outside the country. So I think if geopolitics is determining which country you can export to and which country you can't, Indian entrepreneurs have to become extremely agile. And that again comes back to availability of capital, extreme innovation, very important, because different countries may require different products with different innovation, with different agility as such. So I think agility, extreme innovation to look at the new markets which are emerging is absolutely crucial. And I think companies can focus on that because the large markets, the geopolitics, companies can't control.
Well, so ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from the three gentlemen here. I think there is unanimity through the conversation that we've heard from them on the need for a higher degree of entrepreneurial zeal, a higher degree of entrepreneurial spirit, and much more support to nurture that entrepreneurial spirit, whether it's by way of deregulation, whether it's by way of supporting with capital, R&D, and innovation. or it is tackling the people problem. But I think the need of the hour is for India to focus on its entrepreneurial cachet and its entrepreneurial spirit as the next pathway for success and opportunity. Many, many thanks for joining us here this morning. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this opening session.
We get a photo.
Thank you, Shireen and Ashish, Anand and Sudhir, all on behalf of the board of Indiaspora. Let me thank you not only for your views today, but for actually supporting the organization through its journey. And I'm sure you'll implement a lot of the models that we discussed in the years to come to take India where it needs to be. I think from nano to micro to macro to global, entrepreneurship and collaboration is there. I just want to add one other aspect, because through our group company Jet Synthesis, we are actually working with Gen Zs, the young people, and have been able to create in new age digital media a lot of entrepreneurs and creators. I think this entire, era of getting a creator economy, people actually being able to generate livelihoods themselves, is another big area, I think, where India can continue to do more, both within India and around the world. But moving from a panel discussion now to a TED Talk style of a talk that we have with somebody who's been a strong supporter again of Indiaspora, who gets a standing ovation wherever he goes. And I still remember he gave up commentating at a Wimbledon semi-final to be with Indiaspora at the House of Lords, and really, really move the audience in a way that very few can. Someone who has actually taken India and Asia into the International Hall of Fame through what he has done in tennis. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vijay Amritraj.
I used to play 5 sets, and now the steps become hard to climb, Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. First and foremost, congratulations to MR, Sanjeev, the incredible team at Indiaspora, to put on an event of this nature over 3 days. It is a truly uphill task, and it's been absolutely splendid, extraordinary, and I'm sure all of us feel the same way about what Indiaspora and the team has done. So big round of applause for... the only thing I have to say about MR, though, looking at him now, I can't decide whether to look at his tie or his earring. But I think he looks good with both. Over the last 2 days, we've heard so much about business and a variety of engagements, collaborations, innovations, new tech that's coming into play, inventions, startups, and so on. The one thing that we have not heard of across the 2.5 days is pretty much what I intend to try to address a little bit of, and that's sport, and what a difference it can make. The one thing about sport is that it's very clear. It's very clear. When I went in to play something, it was if I had a good day, I won. If I had a bad day, I lost. It was simple as that. And if you lost to a guy, you didn't want to lose to him again. And you went out and worked as hard as you could to be able to do that. So where are we with sport in India? For me, sport has given me everything in life. It took me places I never thought I would go. It allowed me to meet people I never thought I would meet. And it gave me an opportunity to stay in people's homes in different walks of life, different forms of society, from Stockholm to Sydney, from Tokyo to Tashkent, from Bombay to Boston. It was all incredible commonality for me, which was community, family, friends, bringing people together, and what it means for each person's community to live in peace, to live in joy, and to live with neighbors. And I think, on the one hand, sport can play that role. And sport, you play with someone and you have a good time, you get together with them afterwards socially, makes you feel good. It brings people together. It keeps families together, it brings communities together, and I think to a great extent that's exactly what Indiaspora stands for, bringing communities and people together, not just within the Indian community, but within the communities that we live in different parts of the world. So I do believe that it's a strength that we bring to the table as Indians. And anyone from any part of the world who's visited India fully gets it, gets the idea that hospitality in India is second to none. We are best at it, and for a reason, basically because of the people. The people are there to make you feel good when you leave, that you want to come back. And so they've always been return visitors. As far as sport is concerned, from the time I played way back in the 70s, 50 years ago seems like it went with a blink of an eye. In 1974, I led India to the final of the Davis Cup for the first time in the history of Indian tennis in the Open era. And strangely, after Australia was out of it, America was out of it, Britain was out of it, France was out of it, Spain was out of it, we had a great opportunity to win that final and put India's name on the Davis Cup. And we came up against an apartheid South Africa. And so the decision made from the very top, the then Prime Minister of India called off the match, and we defaulted to South Africa in '74. It took me another 13 years of very, very hard work and sacrifice to once again be able to help lead India to the final again in 1987. 13 years later. The question here is now, where world sport has grown and how far can we relate to India's growth in sport? We grew up with an adage, the old Olympic adage, it's not the winning that counts, but the taking part. We took part in everything. But the West went with that incredible saying by Vince Lombardi, the coach of the Green Bay Packers, who said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And so, in business, all of you have achieved that. Awesome. When you look at the number of incredible Indian CEOs at the top of the top 100 companies in the world, we see that. We see that incredible growth over the last 40, 50 years. But on the odd occasion, we have a Neeraj Chopra, we have a Mary Kom, we have some incredible badminton players. But nowhere in comparison to India's growth. And that's where I think there needs to be a focus. I was recently at a summit and addressing parts of it in a sports segment, which basically said that Indian business of sport in India is at an incredible $52 billion. Of course, 50 of it comes from cricket. But it's okay. We're moving in the right direction. When I grew up and played tennis, the constant question that I had to answer was, yes, you play tennis, what do you do for a living? And when I won my first big tournament, people stopped asking me that question. Of course, the second question was more difficult to answer. My late grandmother used to always say to me, why do you have to go so far to lose? Again, there was clarity to it. There was great clarity to what sport has to offer. The question is, are we able to commit ourselves to such a great extent where it is by far the world's riskiest startup? Just because you put money into a startup and if you invest in 10 companies, you know you might hit pay dirt in a couple of them. Even if they don't, there's an asset to be able to sell. In sport, it's zero. It's zero. That's why the risk-reward ratio is so different, it's so high. But believe you me, it is truly worth it when you get there. We have made giant strides in sport, no question about it. The government of India has been incredibly supportive of sport. Each state in India is spending fortunes of money now to be able to compete with the next state. And each of the kids who actually win medals in local, our own India's national games, are paid good monies when they come back home to their families because they got a gold or a silver or a bronze at the national games. We never had that. When I left India the first time to play in a tournament overseas, I left with 3 pounds. So I had to win in the afternoon to be able to eat at night. I stayed quite thin most of the way. But my whole journey of playing Davis Cup for India for 20 years has been my greatest privilege and honor. Because more than anything else, it taught me about myself. It taught me about what I'm capable of doing and how I can reach for beyond what you think you're going to be able to attain. Sport is clear. Work is yours. You have a good team around you, good family around you, to be able to carry you to where you want to get to. And truly, we've all said this, sky's the limit. When we grow up, we say, sky's the limit. You do your homework, eat your vegetables, work hard, you have great talent, sky's the limit. Till I was doing a television series for a network one time, and one of the guests on my show was the second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. And it was a 1-hour conversation that I had with Buzz at his home, and I went and looked around in his house, and I saw all these various accolades, the Enterprise, the Odyssey, the NASA, his Presidential Medal of Honor, I mean, the whole slew of stuff that was all over his home, except I saw this one little plaque in the corner which caught my eye. And that's an important aspect, where it said, "Who said sky is the limit when I left my footprints on the moon?" So there are moments like this that actually want you to be in sport. And I will just add one little story that I hope will help when you all think of investing and why investing in sport, why investing in Indian sport is critical to our growth together. And I will leave you this one story which brings back my analogy to a Davis Cup match. I was at the tail end of my career. We were playing Argentina, who had a much better team than us, in New Delhi in the summer. The number 1 player was ranked 7 in the world. The number 2 player was ranked 16. One guy was 21. The other guy was 23. I was in my mid-30s. My brother was older than me. My colleague from Chennai, Ramesh Krishnan, was the other player on our team. We played in Delhi. I was also playing captain of the team. And the opening match, I was sitting in the captain's chair in the heat as Ramesh was playing the first match. He loses a tight match to their number 1 player. I go out, have a shower, come back in. I managed to squeeze out in a 4-hour match against their number 2 player, so we won 1 match all. Come back the next day, play a 5-hour match in doubles. My brother and I, we lose 8-6 in the 5th. So I played 9.5 hours over 2 days in the summer. And I come back the next day to keep India alive in the Davis Cup tie, as we had done 2-1. And the guy who's ranked 7 in the world, 21 years of age, has had a day off. So he comes in fresh at 11 o'clock in the morning. He wins the first set, he wins the second set. He's up 3-love, 40-love in the third. I end up squeezing out the third set, 8-6. We go in the locker room for a 10-minute break. The doctor checks me out. The trainer is working on me. And the doctor said, "Well, listen, I can't let you go out and finish this match because you've lost 11 pounds in weight. You're burning up. There is no way you should be able to allow to go out and play this match." And so the whole team around me says, "Listen, you've done great. India's proud of you. Let's go home because you might not survive physically." So this is that moment in time where you hit a crossroads, whether it's business, whether it's family, whether it's spouses, whether it's children, grandparents, whatever it might be, you hit that crossroad. And for me, that was that crossroad. A choice where you look at remaining with status quo, where you remain to be good, or do you take a chance to be great? So I said to the manager, "Listen, let's have the oxygen tank close by. The ambulance needs to be around the corner, but the only way I'm coming off that court is on a stretcher." So I said, Let's go out there. I ended up being 2 match points down in the 4th set. I won in 5 sets, and India went to the final of the Davis Cup. I'm just going to wrap up by saying a big, big thank you to everyone I've had the opportunity to meet today, this last couple of days. It's been just absolutely wonderful for me to be here. Thank you to Amar, thank you to Sanjeev, thank you to the entire Indiaspora team. More than anything else, thanks to each one of you. As you leave here, when you go back, continue to think about community, family, bringing countries and people together. But most important of all, invest in sport. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay, for that very inspiring talk and for getting everyone to look at a new model of how one could really look at sport, both as an investment as well as an integrator for the global diaspora to come together to support India. And I think we'll move on because we are running tight on this plenary, but with Mina Al-Orabi, who's the editor-in-chief of The National, we are in UAE, and we want to get a global view on India. And with Mina, we have a very distinguished panel of people who have been part of Indiaspora for so many years, Rich, Harsh, Karan, Gopal. These are people who have really championed Indiaspora, and we look forward to your thoughts and views. So Mina, over to you. Thank you.
There we go. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning and welcome to the UAE. I'm honored that you would include me in these conversations. So all I want to do is listen, but I get the great honor of moderating our next conversation, the global view of India. We have an incredible cast of speakers and not enough time, but we'll try to do our best. I'd very much like to introduce my panel and welcome them onto stage. Mr. Harsh Shringla, please join us on stage. Lord Karan Bilmoria, please join us. Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, please join us. And Mr. Richard Verma, please join us on stage. Nina. Wonderful. Please take your seats. So we meet at a complex geopolitical moment, and the global view of India within that is going to be hugely important in the coming months. The UN vote last night, and to have the US vote alongside Russia, Belarus, and North Korea was another moment when we all took a moment to reflect on what this means for the world. But more importantly, and bigger picture, as important as the US is, there's also the view of India, particularly after the G20 presidency. And we're very lucky to have Mr. Shringla here to talk about the view of India and also the engagements you had with G20 countries, especially as the world changes when it comes to politics, economics, technology, climate, amongst the pillars that you looked at during the G20. So I want to start with you, please, to ask you about how you see the world's view of India and India's role in this complex geopolitical moment.
Thank you, and let me say what a pleasure it is to be in the Indiaspora Conference for Good and to meet so many of our good friends in one place. To answer your question, Mina, let me take you back to 2020, early 2020 actually, when the pandemic was just breaking out, and a lot of developing countries, small countries, were facing enormous problems in dealing with that challenge. And that's the time that Prime Minister Modi called for a special session of the G20. And Saudi Arabia, at that time, was the chair of the G20. They convened an extraordinary session. And at that session, Prime Minister Modi said, and I can, G20 meetings normally are not on, they're not in the public domain. But since I was in the room, I can share this here. Prime Minister Modi said that this was the first time the G20 was convening on something that was not financial or economic, but humanitarian in nature. And he called for, and I'm quoting him, a human-centric globalization. And it would, I think the G20 then took a number of measures that were very, very far-reaching, including a debt moratorium. India, of course, from that point onwards, I think moved towards a policy where we work for the global common good, what we call a Vishwamitra, a friend of the world. And let's start with COVID. I mean, we all recall the problems during COVID. India was one of the few countries that produced its own indigenous vaccines. We were quick to share our vaccines, probably the only country that shared vaccines across the globe, including in the Gulf. And talking about the Middle East, of course, I'll give you two examples. One was Kuwait. Kuwait came to us and said, look, we have enormous problems in dealing with COVID. How do we deal with it? And we spent a rapid response team of doctors and nurses, and they dealt with it. And the second concerns UAE, and many of our friends are here from the UAE. There was a time when there was a strict lockdown across the globe. And the UAE appealed to us saying that we need food provisions. Despite the lockdown, I think we made a special dispensation. We opened a food corridor where aircraft would come in, pick up food in India, supplies, and then bring them into the UAE. But that policy continued in a way that I think was both in terms of assisting other nations, especially developing countries, carried on into our G20 presidency when before we became president, we consulted all of our Global South partners, what we call the Friends of Global South, and what their expectations of our presidency would be in the G20. We also ensured that the African Union was included in the G20's membership. And the other big change, I think, in terms of our own, the way we conducted our foreign policy was really going from a reactive foreign policy 10 years ago to a proactive leadership-driven foreign policy. I mean, in the earlier days, I remember, we waited for others to take the initiative. The US took the initiative, the UK took the initiative, China took the initiative. But today, the difference is that we are placing our narrative on the global agenda. So whether it is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, well before Donald Trump came on the scene and with his vision of putting an end to conflicts, I think Prime Minister Modi had already made it very clear that we believe that this is not an era of war, that we are on the side of peace. We are not on any side in the conflict. And he himself invested time to go and meet both President Putin and President Zelensky in an effort to bring peace to that area. So I think the change, whether it is inputting into the global narrative, is very much there today in India. And I know time is short, but I'll just conclude with something I recall from last evening. I had gone across to the mandir yesterday, and an incredible, I would say, site in this region, and all that credit goes to the UAE for allowing this wonderful place of worship to come up. Swami Brahma Bihari Das, who is actually the brilliant mastermind behind the success of this initiative, he in conversation told me, he said, and I recall very clearly, he said, everyone wants peace. Even those who wage war want peace. They just don't know how to do it. And so with our moral authority, with our ideological, I would say, balance, because today we are in the happy position where we are regular invitees to the G7, we are members of the Quad, but yet we are members of the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We straddle that ideological space between North and South and East and West. I think India is very well placed to bring that balance into the global order and contribute in a very positive way to bring about peace, tolerance, harmony, and coexistence in the world today.
Thank you very much. I mean, the point also about everybody wants peace is often they want peace on their terms. And so how do you convince them to be open to compromise, which I think is one point that you raise about harmony and building bridges. And India has an important role to play. So we see this as India's view of the world. Mr. Varma, I want to turn to you and ask you, how is India viewed as a diplomat, of course, in several important and senior positions, also as ambassador to India previously, and of course, most recently, in your position at the State Department. How is India viewed from the world, and can it play a role in this geopolitical moment to ease tensions?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and good morning, everybody. And MR, thank you for coming up with this idea 14 years ago. Came into my office and said, I've got this idea to get people together. I said, good luck, and here we are, 14 years later with an incredible crowd. And Ambassador, you really are the modern architect of U.S.-India relations, so thank you for everything that you've done. It's been incredible. Look, there's incredible excitement about India and India's role in the world. About 10 years ago, I started giving a talk about the India of 2030, when India would lead the world in almost every category. Obviously, the most people, but the largest middle class, the most internet users, the most college graduates. You're building 50 new airports right now, the biggest migration of people from rural areas into city areas, third largest economy, third largest military. And so obviously the scale and excitement is so obvious when you go to India and you see this firsthand. I was able to go to every state in India, witnessed incredible things happening. US presidents have known this for decades. You go back to Eisenhower talking about if the US and India were the closest of friends, the world would be a safer, more peaceful place. President Kennedy said the hinge of Asia rests with India. The hinge of fate in Asia rests with India. President Obama, President Biden said that this was the most consequential relationship of the future. But it was President Clinton's visit in 2020 that really set us on a new course. And he laid out 4 areas of cooperation: defense, trade, sustainable development, and energy. And I would say for 25 years, we have made incredible progress along those 4 pathways. We went from 0 in defense trade to 23 billion. We went from a few tens of billions in two-way trade to now over 200 billion. We went from a few 100,000 visitors, Indian visitors to the United States, to now well over 1 million every year, and well over 1 million Americans to India, 300,000 Indian students. So we have surged in so many areas in our climate and healthcare. And so 25 years, incredible progress. Your question, I think, building upon the meeting of President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, which was a good meeting. They have a good relationship. But I think we're in a different era. And I will say, I think that 25-year period has come to an end, and we are entering a different period. And some would say, well, is that meant to suggest we're in a negative place? No, we have a very strong relationship. We're a very positive relationship. But I think it's decidedly different. If you look at the joint statement between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, for the first time, it talks about shared interests, not shared values. For the first time, there is no mention of collaboration on health. There's no mention of sustainable development goals. There's no mention of climate or clean energy or solar or wind or battery storage. There is a focus on 2 of those 4 pillars that President Clinton talked about: trade and security. So we are entering, I think, a much narrower relationship, a much more focused relationship. It doesn't mean it's bad or good, but I will say for this room in particular, it puts enormous burdens on all of you. Just the closing of USAID in India after 60 years, $17 billion, 555 projects, ending tuberculosis, ending malaria, working with farmers, working on clean water, working on sanitation. These were not charity projects, as all of you have talked about. These were joint research, joint development projects that, frankly, we were trying to scale and take to Africa, Latin America, other parts of Asia. It was Prime Minister Modi who said the real value of the US-India relationship is not what we do for each other, it's what we do for the world. I think that part has ended. It's up to you to fill that void.
Thank you. I think the applause indicates challenge accepted. Lord Bilmoria, I want to ask you, of course, from UK perspective and a wider European perspective, the view of India at this moment, a very confident, able India that can play a role, as we just heard, not only in peace when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, looking at the possibility of mediation, but also on the global stage of setting what the new global order looks like. What's the view from Europe?
Whenever I host people in Parliament, and I, at the outset, want to thank MR, Sanjeev, Indiaspora, Nina, thank you. What a fantastic organization, what a great event, bringing all of us together, and the magical moments that have taken place over the past hours, I think we'll all remember and will benefit from. But I've had the privilege of hosting Indiaspora twice in Parliament last year, and I showed people around, and there's a painting in St. Stephen's Hall of the first British ambassador, Sir Thomas Roe, presenting his credentials to the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And that was in 1614. So when we say we have a 400-year relationship with India, it is a 400-year relationship. And where are we today? Where India has overtaken the UK, is now the 5th largest economy in the world, and the UK is the 6th largest. But you know, this is not about scale and numbers. It's about mutual respect and partnership and collaboration. Look at us here in the UAE. The UAE makes up less than 1% of India's population, and yet is seen as a respected partner of India. With huge, huge things going on between the two countries. The UK is less than 5% of the population of India, and yet we can still be equal partners in terms of mutual respect and capabilities. And this is where I think, I'm sorry, the UK has not been doing particularly well in terms of world image. You know, look at what happened in 2016. You had two global events in 2016. Brexit and Trump being elected for the first time. And I remember Professor Ravi Abdullah at Harvard Business School in January 2017 doing an analysis of Brexit and Trump, and he did a similar analysis of Trump's victory just now, of the Republicans and the Democrats, and I tell you, it is identical, the fault lines. Pro-immigration, anti-immigration, rural, urban, more educated, less educated, older, younger, you can just divide it. And Brexit? How many of you, by the way, think Brexit was a huge mistake and an act of self-harm for the UK? Can I see a show of hands? I see this around the world. Somebody should take a picture of this and send it to Boris Johnson. Yeah, we've had 5 prime ministers under the Conservative Party after David Cameron. One of them lasted for 49 days, Liz Truss. You know, this is unfortunately the image we have. And now we have a Labour government that wants growth, but has had a budget that's put in anything but generation of growth and promotion of entrepreneurship. And yet what I say is this. I talk to people and people talk about these issues about the UK. I say, what happens when you have resilient countries with strong democracies? And that's what the same thing about India and the UK. We have a phenomenally strong democracy. India, Prime Minister Modi elected for the 3rd time, this time with the coalition government, you've got that continuity and strong leadership. Our democracy has thrown up what we've got at the moment. What we cannot change in a country like the UK is our institutional strength. And I think the combination of hard and soft power, there are very few countries in the world that have real combination of hard and soft power. And I think India does have it, and I think the UK has it in abundance. Our nuclear deterrent, by the way, the at-sea nuclear deterrent that we have that will now have to protect Europe along with France if the US pulls out of NATO or withdraws, that's going to be crucial for world security. So our defense force is small but powerful. Our financial services, we're still 1 or 2 in the world in financial services. Our professional services, our lawyers, our accountants, our creative industries, the best in the world. Our film, best in the world. We have phenomenal manufacturing. We're still one of the top 10 manufacturers in the world. And our soft power, the BBC, watched by 500 million people every week. The royal family, Her Majesty the Queen, when she passed away, respected around the world. The Majesty King respected around the world. And as for Premier League football, hundreds of millions of followers around the world. So that strength, I think, is very much robust and very much there, regardless of how incompetent our leadership may be from time to time, as we've seen. And where Europe is concerned, this is again an issue with Europe. By the way, Europe now has the President of the Council, Antonio Costa, of Indian origin, of Goan origin. We've just had a Prime Minister of Indian origin. And that's the other thing about this conference that demonstrates the Indians reaching the very top in every field. And that makes me feel so, so proud.
So, strength of institutions and strength of democracies being two important pillars of UK-India ties. I want to turn to Mr. Srinivasan, please. And I want to ask you, as you, of course, through the many relationships you have and the work that you do, and looking at not only economic foundations, but also tech, where the future is going. How do you see the world's view of India, and what's India's role when we look at both the economic and technological changes that are happening?
Thank you, and again, my congratulations to everybody at Indiaspora, MR, and the team to put such a wonderful group of people together in such a wonderful location. See so many friends here. You know, I was pondering for the last 5 minutes or maybe more than 5 minutes as to what I'm doing in this panel. So let me first.
You're grounding it.
So let me just reflect on that, because I'm the only person for whom leaving India once a year is a big event. And sometimes I don't even leave India once a year. So I know every nook and corner of India, and I find there are many nooks and corners I still need to know. So I was just reflecting on all these very distinguished people and their wonderful comments that they were making. And what struck me from just an entirely Indian perspective, right, is that today in a world where everybody has stripped themselves of idealism and innocence and any kind of posturing of how high their values are and so on and so forth. It is the same Eisenhower who regretted his pro-Pakistan policy towards the end of his first term. So let us not forget also those aspects of life, right? So I think with all this innocence gone, everybody is very, very blatantly standing naked with their self-interest across the world. That's how it seems to me. And Ambassador Shingla cannot say that. I don't know whether he thinks that, but I can certainly, even if he thinks, he will not be able to say that in a public forum. None of these positions I'm able to freely say that. India, Indians, Indianness are three different things, all interrelated. Everybody wants to have a relationship with India. In a decade from now, we will have some kind of maybe $20,000 per family per capita, which means we're going to be a very big source of consumption. We have tons and tons of wonderfully talented, skilled men and women who can serve the world through GCCs and so on. Then we have Indians who go, many of them overseas, very accomplished in what they do. We keep, even now, for some strange reason, still celebrating, oh, we have a Indian, in this position, that position. I don't know why we celebrate this. It's fairly obvious that the talented people are required everywhere in the world, and every country will use talented people to their best of their benefits. Indians will also not hesitate to use non-Indians for their own benefit. There's nothing unique about it, just a pure, simple, pragmatic self-interest that people are pursuing in terms of talent. So Indians are everywhere. We have many Indians, fortunately, to support the world and give them into positions of whatever way they can serve the world and benefit for themselves. But there is something called Indianness, which I think, and I noticed that there is a Maharaj from the Ramakrishna Mission, there is a Swamiji from the ISKCON sitting here. There is something called Indianness. And I think what India has to do, and Prime Minister Modi did that when he talked about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in G20, but I think that's just the beginning. That the Indianness is something that we can actually offer more to not only within India, but to the world. What values and our ability to make tolerance an intrinsic part of our life, our ability to accept other person's point of view without necessarily giving up our points of view, and how to work in harmony. I think Vijay spoke very well about community and families coming together. I think that is the value of Indianness that we have. And that is something that will sustain us and will continue to sustain us. We were not having the world's highest GDP during the Mughal era for no reason. So obviously we've been very entrepreneurial, very enterprising, otherwise we wouldn't have been there. So it's not like we're going to discover something new by becoming prosperous again. We're just going to go back to what we were, right? And places like Dubai, the merchants of this area have long since known that when they traded with India. Here are also very enterprising people. Sailing and navigation and marine life is so incredibly intertwined with the Emirati culture for ever since time we know. So given all of that, I think with this Indianness which will steer us, the problem we have to confront right now in India is how to scale. We don't really understand scale well, which is kind of odd when we're having Kumbh Mela, where one country like Greece is coming every day to attend the Kumbh Mela. I was also one of those people who attended, as was MR. How do we understand scale? Because I think for us to become a very responsible role in the world with 20% of the population has to be our ability to manage institutions better, to manage scale. We need institutionalization, whether it is of religious organizations like the Ramakrishna Mission, whether it's of our regulators who are much maligned every day in the newspapers, whether it is other social organizations, the way we run government. We have a situation, a very unique position in the country where India is the only country in the world, a democracy, which does not have a third level democracy. It's a very big issue. We have a bill in parliament called the anti-defection bill, which prevents representatives from voting on what they believe is good and have to follow the party whip, otherwise they get expelled because of some 1990 incident of very good intentions of the then Prime Minister. So we have many such issues of building scales. When I look at India, I look at saying, how do we build institutions? How do we build institutions in our own shape and form, not try to copy anybody else? And without these institutions, whether it's social, whether it's political, we will struggle. I think economically we'll figure it out because that's something we know from time immemorial, right? But how do we, even there we have many challenges because we have a dominance of 3-4 large groups. We need about 100 such groups in India for scale. So everywhere we need more institutionalized ways of working in an Indian institutionalized way using our formula of Indianness. So I'm sorry, I don't know much about the world at all. I run a private equity fund where we do not accept anything other than rupees. So I'm kind of very, very India-centric in my approach. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we only have 5 more minutes left for this panel. So I'm going to ask each of you very briefly, since with your incredible experience and understanding of course, India and the world, what is one event or policy issue that you're keeping your eye out for in the next year, in the coming year? So in 2020, if we were to meet again in February 2026, what's one issue that you would think has impacted the world and that you're keeping an eye out, and of course, India's place in the world? So I'm going to start with our last speaker and then work my way back.
Who knows the least about the subject. But I think from an Indian point of view, at least in India, right, I think the thing that we have to deal with are much more related to our internal issues. Because therefore, in my mind, what we are looking for in India is more where we will go as Indians. And I'm not sure that the international issues are going to be the more important thing for us, because everybody will, the distinguished speakers will know more about this subject. But we are looking at the one thing that the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and the Chief Economic Advisor spoke about, and that is deregulation. Because the biggest thing holding back India right now is over-regulation, which came from very good reasons of the past, but are not relevant for the needs of the future. So I think it's a very Indian-centric view, but now the Prime Minister is talking about deregulation commission after his visit, maybe inspired by Doge, I don't know, when he saw it in America. But I think we're looking at more deregulation, and that will really unleash the entrepreneurial forces, as my friend Ashish Dhawan made in his opening remark in the first panel.
So it's really hard to pick one issue. You mentioned the vote at the UN last night. We could talk about that all day and the dramatic change that is in the US position. We could talk about the advances in technology and both tech for good and tech being used for bad purposes. But the one issue that I just want to raise for everybody is what's going to happen with immigration. You know, there's 31 million of us, I think, that have left India. My dad tells a great story about arriving in the United States with $14 and a bus ticket in 1963. Heard that story so many times growing up. Sometimes he had $22, sometimes he had $14, but you get the idea. He started over with next to nothing, took a big risk. 50 years later, his kid gets to go back to India as the US ambassador. That is the immigrant story, right? That's winning the lottery 50 times over. I think what we all have to remember is that those stories are happening today, next week, next month. There is another person landing at JFK this week with $14 and a bus ticket. What's our reaction to him or her going to be, to their family? That's happening in other countries around the world. These isms that we're dealing with, populism, nationalism, authoritarianism, fascism, as you get further and further down the line, they become harsher and harsher to the immigrant story. And it really is up to all of us not to forget about where we came from, not to forget about those journeys, not to pick up the ladder and say we got here all on our own, and remember all those people who are really struggling to make it. And that's why I love this organization so much, because I know you won't forget about their stories too.
Thank you.
In many ways, I look back, just following on from Rich, what you just said, that I went from, born in Hyderabad, 19-year-old student, to study in the UK. And people talk about the American dream. Well, in many ways, I've lived the British dream. I built a business, Cobra Bear, from scratch, a household name in the UK. I've been a university chancellor twice. I was one of the youngest people appointed to the House of Lords. I've been there for 18 years. I've been president of the Confederation of British Industry, not just the first Indian, the first ethnic minority ever to be president of the Confederation of British Industry. I've done all these things because Britain has given me the opportunity to do that. So I'm proud to be British. I'm proud to be a British Asian. I'm proud to be a Zoroastrian Parsi. But wherever we are in the world, we integrate in the countries that we live in to the best of our abilities, but we are always Indian, and I'm always proud to be Indian. And the point I want to make is a thing that we take for granted and we don't appreciate enough. Whether it's the 30 million of us around the world, or whether it's the 1.4 billion Indians in India, our greatest strength is we are the most diverse country in the world by miles. And that diversity, from the 100,000 Zoroastrian Parsis, to the 20 million Sikhs, to the 200 million Muslims, to the billion Hindus, to the races, the languages, the cultures, the terrain. No country comes close to it. And we managed to hold it all together in this phenomenal democracy. That is the strength of India that we need to keep harnessing and never, ever taking for granted and always appreciate.
Don't put the mic down. You didn't answer my question. What's the one policy issue
The one policy
this year? So we had migration, we had India internally deregulation. What would be yours that people should keep an eye out on?
by far, it's got to be, from India's point of view, has got to be right at the center of the world in getting this unstable, uncertain, dangerous situation that we're in. We're quite frankly, we're closer to the brink of a world war than we've ever been since World War II. We've got to prevent that.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Shingala, if I can give you the last words on that geopolitical moment and anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, last but not the least, well, I'll take up from where Karan left off. Essentially, I think, let's come to the region that we are in now, the Middle East, or West Asia as we call it. I think we came very, very close to being drawn into a larger conflagration in the Middle East. When Iran and Israel were raining missiles on each other, we were one step away from being drawn into a larger regional conflict. And there was great concern back at home because we have 9 million of our diaspora living in the Gulf region. We depend greatly on the Gulf for our energy. And of course, it's a very, very critical part of the world. And I think if we look at this region, we are not beyond that risk today. Every day is a new day, and every day is the risk of some unforeseen eventuality exists. And I think the advent of Donald Trump into the global scene has probably exacerbated these risks. I mean, look at it this way. He's upended a traditional view of global diplomacy. I mean, from Ukraine to Russia, bilateralism to multilateralism, and from the Middle East to two-state solution to a coastal resort in Gaza. So it's definitely a change. But I think from India's point of view, given our own experiences in digital transformations, climate change, dealing with issues that are inclusive, that are, in some senses sustainable and tech-driven, we want to provide solutions wherever we can. And there are two initiatives that are in the Middle East that are very, very important. One is what we call the I2U2. I think this has been explained before. Israel, India, UAE, and United States. The other is the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Both of these reinforce the Abraham Accord. And if you notice, when Prime Minister Modi went to the United States about 10 days ago, the joint statement referred to both of these initiatives as being extremely important and which would be taken forward. The first initiative came during Trump's first term and the second during the Biden era. And I think those are going to be, real game changers in the region. And the diaspora will have a very important role to play in both these. And a very quick word on the diaspora. When you conduct foreign policy, I think one of the major differences in our conduct of foreign policy today is the role of the diaspora. I think no factor, from my personal point of view, has been greater and more instrumental in helping us achieve our goals of a very different conduct of foreign policy from India than the support that we receive from diaspora. And coming from a perspective in the United States, let me say, not because he's here in the room, but no one has contributed more to supporting India's tech and startup sector than MR himself. He's been the person who has mobilized the US venture capital sector to take a close look and to support the Indian tech industry. And this is what I mean by the role of the diaspora. I think that is critical and will continue to be more and more important as our diaspora grows and becomes important across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The global view of India often comes through diaspora, where people often meet an Indian that has immigrated or is of Indian heritage in their own country, and through that builds relations. There's a lot more we could do, but unfortunately our panel has to run up. Indianness, importance of diaspora, but also finding ways of building projects like the IMAC project and the economic corridor. Importance to avoid, God forbid, a world war at a very precarious moment, but the importance of migration. I'm a lucky migrant. I've from a family of refugees to them becoming a migrant here in the UAE, seeing the value of allowing immigration and legal migration and finding ways that can work, that many of us, almost all of us here, have benefited from. Thank you very much to my excellent panel, and thank you all for attending.
Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to be seated. We're going into the next part of this opening plenary. While, we heard, I would say, amongst the many isms, isolationism. I was just kind of looking that up. In that era, India's role to really be able to integrate the world, both from a global standpoint or from an India standpoint out to the world. Please request you to settle down. Indiaspora is also giving a voice to new and young people. And the main stage. And we're going to have a short segment here. We've got Sneh Vaswani, who is the co-founder and CEO of Miko, who's doing a Make in India for the world. So let him talk about his story. Sneh, welcome.
A very good morning, everyone. I'm Sneh Vaswani, co-founder and CEO at Miko. We are a bunch of folks from IIT Bombay who are extremely passionate of leveraging robotics and AI for societal good. Over the past decade, one thing that we've focused on has been the social and emotional well-being of the next generation. Anyone who has kids around you will relate to what I'm saying. Today's children, the social emotional well-being of children has been declining for the past few decades. Anxiety, depression, mental wellness challenges, you'll be surprised to know 1 in 5 kids visits a therapist at a young age in the US. And both the parents have started working, less time for the child, and there is no holistic solution towards this problem. A holistic and affordable solution that can help a parent in their parenting journey and deal with behavioral challenges. 37% of parents are struggling with bullying of kids in classrooms. So what we've done, we've built a wellness platform centered around a consumer robot as an enabler. This robot talks to you, engages, educates, and entertains the child while assessing and reporting the developmental metrics back to parents. Today, the core technology of Miko has been built in-house over the past 10 years. Talking of scale, we have over 500,000 families who are using Miko today and getting the benefits out of the platform. We have kids over 140 plus countries who are using the products and over 100 million hours of engagement data building our own SLM and LLM, which surpasses ChatGPT bot in terms of quality responses to kids, which is age appropriate, culture appropriate, and relevant for that child. Over the next decade, we'll enter 100 million homes and build a $1 billion robotics and AI company from India for the world. Thank you so much.
All the best, Sneh, and good luck on that vision of yours. And I'm sure the diaspora is here to support, not only to use your products, but even see how you can get it into every home in the world. But, we're moving to our last segment for this opening plenary. And, for people like Sneh, if I were to think of 2 faces from India that have really become the faces that have seen to have developed the startup ecosystem and really supported, entrepreneurs throughout these last few decades with Chris and Sunil, I cannot imagine 2 better faces. And great to have them here with us. And over to you, Shireen, again, to, get into another discussion, which is going to be, I'm sure, around startup, philanthropy, and many other things. Over to you.
I think we started this morning talking about the advantages that India enjoys, and I talked about a bunch of Ds. We have to add the diaspora to the number of Ds that we have going for us as advantages, and clearly that's very visible here from what we are witnessing in Abu Dhabi today. Welcome to Indiaspora, Sunil Munjal and Chris Gopalakrishnan. It's a pleasure to have you join us here. I'm just going to take off from where the conversations have left us. And I want to start by talking to you about the scale gauntlet that Gopal Srinivasan has thrown our way, especially since we're talking about the role of private capital. Before we talk about philanthropic capital, let me talk about private capital. Mr. Munjal, let me start by asking you, the scale problem that we seem to have, what can be done to fix it? Are we any closer to being able to find a fix for it? Do you feel confident, optimistic? What's the prognosis at this point in time?
So as you're probably aware, Shireen, and maybe some people in the room, in our organization, we built 7 globally leading companies, and we've actually gone on to support a number of others which actually have built scale. And in my measure, scale must not be just the biggest and the best in the city, region you are. It has to be best in class in the world, and that is the only scale we should be comparing with. And Gopal is right that this is one of the challenges that we face. We built multiple islands of excellence. We need to figure out a way to allow first the excellence to leak and these islands to scale to sizes that actually make true impact. So both are linked, by the way, to impact as also the efficiency, because scale has a magical quality which allows you to do things you cannot otherwise do. The reach you can create, the connections you can make, the impact you can have, the benefit you can get. And all of that lies in scale. So even if you need to shrink your margin, the scale more than makes up to allow you to do, to build businesses which are able to fund themselves, support themselves, and many, many others around them. So what do we need to do? It's actually a mindset more than anything else. As I mentioned, we have done it multiple times. In fact, when we look at any new investment, one of our key criteria, we actually don't look at a balance sheet or a business plan till very, very late when we're looking at any investment. We actually look at people first. We look at their credibility, their governance system, their integrity, and whether they are lateral thinkers or not. We love lateral thinkers, by the way. We like those who are completely passionate about what they do, but have the ability to turn on a coin when the environment changes, because the environment will change.
Yeah.
That's a given always. And we also only invest in those which will have a massive positive social fallout, but we will never invest in a company that we cannot support. We never invest in a company that's not aiming to become the biggest and the best.
Aiming to become the biggest and the best. Is it hard to find companies that are aiming to become the biggest and the best, Chris Gopalakrishnan, as you look at where Axelar's money goes in at this point in time? Are you finding more candidates who will fit the bill of being the biggest and the best and world class?
I think what is required is the mindset that Sunil talked about. We have many examples of companies that have scaled up significantly, that have provided new models for the world, and that have gone from India to the world. So, I'm fortunate to be involved in a few of those. I'll just give you 2 examples. And I'm going to give you these examples not from the for-profit sector, from the not-for-profit sector deliberately. And the reason for doing that is, if it can be done from the not-for-profit sector, I'm quite sure that we can do it from the for-profit sector also. I'm not talking about the for-profit because IT industry itself is a great example of how we have gone from India to the world. So from the not-for-profit sector, the first thing is the modular open source identity program, which is an open source implementation of the UID. Everybody talks about UID, unique ID in India. But do you know that UID has now been exported to 29 countries in the world? 100 million Philippines are getting UID on this MOSIP platform. The MOSIP platform is housed in IIIT Bangalore, which is a educational institution supported primarily by philanthropy. And the model is very unique. It's completely open source. So any country is, free to download it and implement it. We train the implementation agency or the system integrator. and you can use any system integrator, and multiple countries are using it. On top of that, many of the startups are now going to these countries to provide services, Indian startups. And this is a unique model India has provided to the world, which is public infrastructure, private innovation. DPI, digital public infrastructure, on top of which, um, we build applications and we build companies, etc. The term new models for the world, right? Instead of being dependent on few companies for all your technology needs, you create a public infrastructure. On top of that, private innovation goes. And it's now being exported to the entire world. Okay? More and more countries are looking at it. The World Bank is supporting it and doing this. The second example I want to give, again, it's to also say, we must have the confidence to do it. And I'm going to actually take your permission to read something now.
Please do.
Well, I'm proud of this also. In the special issue, the Journal of Comparative Neurology is proud to bring to the scientific community a monumental contribution that comes not from the usual Western powers in business of generating knowledge about the brain, but from an unexpected newcomer. The contribution is Dharani, a freely accessible digital micrometric resolution three-dimensional atlas of the developmental fetal human brain, currently available for 5 gestational ages during the second trimester, and so on. The Indian equivalent of the Allen Institute of Brain Science in the US. This is the Sudha Gopalakrishnan Brain Center at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. It is no wonder then that the Dharani, the second human brain atlas that the Journal of Comparative Neurology presents to the scientific community, was delivered by a brain research center created with a single specific purpose of mapping the human brain on a cellular level. This is launched as a joint initiative of the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor of Government of India, Private Philanthropy. Dharani is the largest publicly accessible digital data set of the human fetal brain, created less than 1/10 of the initial funds that powered the Allen Brain Atlas, and with a technology platform that was entirely custom-made in India between 2020 and 22 during COVID pandemic, featuring 5,132 plates of developing human brain. And it's a freely available resource. So Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, that joins the Allen Brain Institute, and India joins the US at the table of human brain cartography, where large sums are invested in the name of providing humankind with freely accessible atlases of available knowledge about the structures that compose the human brain. This is an example of DNA sequence. First time the genes DNA was sequenced, right? Getting human brain data at the cellular level. So I'm just giving you these two examples to say that from India to the world at scale, at world-class nature is possible. We need to have the confidence and we need to invest. And our startups, more than 100 unicorns, many of them are becoming global. I have absolutely no doubt about this.
No doubt about the fact that India is going to march into the world across different categories. And thank you very much for highlighting that breakthrough that has just come in from the IIT lab in Chennai. And of course, for those of you who don't know, but IIT Madras has in fact created a significant incubator, which has been an incubator for many of India's leading startups, especially on the space side as well. So it's good to see that there's a breakthrough there on what's happening in medical R&D. But Mr. Srinivas, Chris, let me take that point forward with you. When we talk about these examples that you gave us of a company sitting out of an academic institution in Bangalore being able to do digital public infrastructure, or this recent example that you spoke of, how do we ensure that these don't become exceptions, that these are in fact the norm? What needs to change in the ecosystem, in the environment, to ensure that we see many more of these examples proliferate?
So over the last 10 years, I have seen the Prime Minister leading from the front on the startup ecosystem. He announced the Startup India initiative in 2015. From then to now, India has become the third best destination for startups. We have more than 120, 150 unicorns today, and this will scale up. Many of them will stay around to become multinationals. I know at least 20 companies which are startup companies which are going to do IPO in the next 2 years, right? At least 20.
20 going to IPO in the next 2 years.
Next 2 years, right? So, in the startup ecosystem, I see the confidence and the money coming to build these large companies. We need to. So, where the gap is, we need to invest in research and R&D. If India needs to become a developed nation, it will have to be built on IP that we create in the country that we own. The IP has to be owned by Indian entities. And for that, we need to invest in, R&D, and we have to increase the spending on R&D. Government is stepping up by announcing the national missions on AI, on cyber physical systems, on quantum computing, etc. Government is stepping up the money. The challenge is that money is not being absorbed because there's no place to put that money. The capacity to create large mission mode programs doesn't exist. And industry is missing.
Why is industry missing, Sunil Munjal? Year after year, at the time of the budget, industry talks about the fact that we'll do more R&D if the government gives us more tax breaks. Why does Indian industry need tax breaks to incentivize research and development? Why is industry missing, to Chris's point?
So there are two parts, I think. One, which was mentioned in the earlier session. What you need is a simple set of rules, laws, and regulations, and the government to step out of the way for business really to function, but to be available as a safety net. Those are the two requirements from it. In fact, some years ago, we had this interesting conversation. I think you were in the room that day. When we asked government, we only need 3 things from you. He said, oh, that's great. What are these 3? I said, make it easy to set up a business, make it easy to run a business, and God forbid, if you need to, make it easy to shut down a business. So our rules, laws are actually based on mistrust. Please remember, they were designed in British time when a small minority was trying to run a country that was against them. So all the rules say, citizen, I presume you're going to do the wrong thing. Industry, I presume you're crooked. So if you turn this on its head, I think you will unleash a tremendous amount of energy which already lies in our system. Going back to your point on should tax breaks be there? Tax breaks are there every country in the world for research, for innovation, for new ideation, for philanthropy. We don't have a tax break for philanthropy, by the way, in India. We are one of the few countries. So I think we need to be smart about this, because what you're doing is you're directing behavior towards good things. And creating new knowledge and innovation research, as we've heard innumerable number of times, is an absolute crying need today.
Yeah.
So company after company has said we want to do it, but both the regulation and the ability. So please remember, in India, we have a very interesting system. We have frugal manufacturing, frugal design, frugal engineering, and also thinner margins in many other parts of the world. So it's important that we create this virtuous cycle of growth with higher consumption, therefore higher demand, therefore higher production, therefore higher reinvestment into capacity. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's exactly the conversation we've had every year. At this moment, if you ask me why are there are companies investing, why are more companies not investing? Because many of them are running at 60, 70% capacity utilization. And they're concerned that we've seen this demand go up and down, first in the rural areas, then in the urban markets. But I'm a great optimist on India. I think our direction is absolutely right. We need to accelerate some of these initiatives. And again, right from the Prime Minister down, they have spoken of the deregulation now. And I think it is necessary. So it's not R&D in isolation that will make a difference.
Sure.
It's our availability to absorb it, create the capacity, utilize it, and then recycle it back. So if you look at some institutions, I can give you the example of Mayo Clinic, for example. Okay? They are considered the #1 healthcare institution in the world year after year after year, for 2 reasons alone. One, they have the best record keeping in the world. Second, they have a unique ability to turn research into actual care and protocols for care.
Yeah. No, you're right in pointing that out. But Chris, let me come back to you, since we're talking about impact and we're also talking about doing things for good. In India, we have the corporate social responsibility, which is mandatory. Companies, profitable companies, need to park away 2% of their profits towards corporate social responsibility. And then you have philanthropic capital. So the available pool of capital has been going up year after year. The question now is, how do we mobilize this capital to really be able to unlock value at scale? What role and relevance do you see between CSR as well as philanthropic capital to address some of India's access deficits that we're talking about?
So I'm truly focused on research, solving problems for the medium to long term rather than addressing problems today. And I think there is a role for CSR and philanthropy to invest in research. Very few initiatives are there to invest in research in the country. So one, I have been saying that out of the CSR funds, it's estimated to be about 25,000 crores per year. The industry is expected to spend. Allocate 20%. That's 5,000 crores per year, and directed towards investment in research. Because we want industry to invest. So
how do we create this national compact, so to speak? Because what
privately managed. So
exactly. So because you get to spend what you want to using your CSR money or your philanthropic money.
So
how do we create this national compact to address problems at scale?
So we need to understand the role IP and R&D are going to play in the development of the country and transition to a developed economy. We need to create that kind of narrative and storyline which says that we must invest in innovation. We need to invest in our own IP and things like that. I think if we are able to do that in two-wheeler, for example, we are the leaders in the world. So we need to create those categories in everything that we do. And we need to think about from India to the world, which two-wheeler we are doing that, right? So we have to think about this and have the, I think we have the money. We have to just direct it towards the relevant areas and
So I think the direction has begun already.
Yeah. One more thing I just want to point. India has a very unique opportunity because India is constrained to develop in a world where sustainability has become an issue, right? We can't develop using fossil fuels. If we develop, then we will actually destroy India and destroy the world.
Yeah.
Right? We have to develop in an inclusive environment because of the size of the country and the composition of the economy.
Yeah.
So, that we have to develop. So that for the world is very, very important. And this will become the model for especially the emerging countries from India to the world.
Can India create the models for the emerging part of the world, for emerging economies? Sunil Munjal, creating that compact between the public and the private sector to address some of these problems. If I would ask you to lay out for us the matrix, the grid, so to speak, of what you believe the new model should be, what would it look like?
I'll give you an example of what we have done ourselves. So what we decided many, many years ago was, any place we set up a business, we will set up a foundation project, any place. Whether we set up a factory or even an office, we will always set up either an education project or a healthcare project, clean drinking water, gender issues, skilling, rural development, or the big initiative now we're working on is arts and culture. And all of them, by the way, are scale. We have 30,000 kids studying in our schools. Our hospital, teaching hospital, is one of the largest in the country right now. We have 1,950 beds in one location with 26 super specialties. Our festival, which started 10 years ago in Goa, now attracts a footfall of 100,000 a day over an 8-9 period. I think it's one of the largest, if not the actual largest festival in the world. We are currently...
Well, congratulations on creating the largest art and culture festival in India for the world, Sunil Munjal.
And it is for the world because we have artists coming from 30 countries. We have visitors coming from about 60, and it's growing every year. We had 74 of the world's top leading cultural institutions attending last December. We've now started work on a new facility in Delhi, which I believe will be the only arts and culture center of its kind in the world. Only place in the world where you will be able to experience every part of the entire ecosystem of every art form on one campus, including education, training, skilling, research, innovation, practice, as also almost a rediscovery of our heritage, and contemporizing our artisanal skills as well. Being done to scale, all of them being done to world scale, because we cultural heritage which is richer than the rest of the world. And as Karan was saying right now, our diversity is not a weakness; it's actually our strength. The amazing variety that you have across the country in terms of languages. We're working, for example, on musical instruments that are no longer in use. We've collected, I don't remember the exact number now, somewhere between 500 or such. And we are actually trying to bring them back into use. We're doing research on pushing the boundary, both of new knowledge based on old experiences. The center is on the planet on day zero. It's being designed as a carbon neutral and a water positive center. And majority of the passive techniques are from over 1,000 years ago.
Nice.
But we have the top tech companies also working with us at the same time.
Right.
So that's one thing that we have tried to do, and that we happily impart that knowledge to anybody who comes. We actually talk about this in multiple fora and platforms, because I think more people need to do this to be able to cross the barrier, not wait for direction to do it. It has to be our own initiative, because we need this.
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right in pointing out that as we attack the future, we need to preserve the past as well. And we need to build on the past. But Chris Gopalakrishnan, you said we need to story tell. So let me end by asking you, are we closer to the climax of this story? And if yes, what would the climax read like?
Well, the climax is India becoming a developed country in the next, I don't know, 25 years, 30 years, which means that we will be one of the largest, second largest, first largest economy in the world, maybe second largest economy in the world. And more important, a per capita income of close to $20,000, 1.2 will be no more poor. They are going to be middle class or amazing transition in a very short period. I think that's the climax we are all looking for. And more importantly, the next generation has to take the lead in doing this. Our generation has done little bit of the work, but now it's the next generation which has to do the rest of the work.
The challenge we have to address here is speed. We have to get richer before we get old.
We have to get richer before we get older, and adaptability, agility, and of course taking the reins forward is the gauntlet that you're throwing to the next generation. But Sudhir Munjal and Chris Gopalakrishnan, many thanks for joining us. Impact at scale, ladies and gentlemen. A big round of applause to the both of them. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and your stories with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi everyone, coffee will be served upstairs at the P1 or the podium 1 level. Please note that the coffee break will be very short till 11:45, after which we'll start with the breakout sessions. Thank you.